Go to your own website and count the number of times that you say we, our, or your brand name. And then count the number of times you say you or your on your website. If you're saying we, our, or your brand name more than you're saying, you've written your website for yourself, not for your customer and not in their perspectives.
Most companies don't struggle because they lack ideas. They struggle because no one can clearly explain them. Why their strategy actually works inside the boardroom. Clarity beats creativity every single time. Today's guest has spent more than 30 years in those rooms where the budgets were 9 figures and results were non-negotiable. Rich Smith is the former CMO turned behavioral marketing expert who has helped founders, CEOs, and boards close the gap between marketing and the language of business. This episode is about turning experience into authority and building growth that actually holds up under pressure. Welcome, Rich.
Hey, thanks, Melissa. Very nice intro. Thanks for having me on.
I'm excited to talk to you, and I'm a little tongue twisted this morning, but I'm excited to chat a little bit about you. You've said companies don't fully lack ideas, but they misunderstand their own strategy. Where does that disconnect start?
Well, I think it often starts with just a natural human tendency to want to do things. When I talk to a CEO for the first time, I get questions like, should we be on Facebook? Should we be doing more with social media, more paid search? Should we be going to more trade shows? The smart answer that I always give is, well, maybe, tell me what your strategy is, and I'll tell you if those are the right tactics, because people just naturally want to jump to tactics. So I think without doing the hard work to get the strategy, the strategic foundation in place first, if you just jump to tactics, you can get lucky. A blind squirrel finds a nut every now and then. It might happen, but chances are good that you're going to struggle for a while, or you might get lucky in one channel, but you're going to have other channels that are a big drag on your acquisition cost, and you don't even realize it.
Yeah, it's so true. And I love this because I find that marketing teams struggle a lot communicating with boards or senior leadership of what their strategy really is. And to your point, we're going to go to this event and buy these ads and buy that ads, but there's no real strategy. So what signals tell you that a strategy isn't really understood yet internally?
Well, I think it's pretty straightforward. Only one thing that I try to do, I just ask people. When I talk to a new organization, I ask them, hey, tell me what your strategy is. And you ask enough people, 5 different people, and you get 5 different answers, then you know that there isn't a really good understanding of what the strategy is. And that's a real drag on the performance of an organization, particularly a mid-sized business or a startup business, where a lot of people are doing a lot of things. And if you are not clearly aligned from top to bottom, you're going to have a lot of wasted effort that you really just can't afford.
Yeah, I agree. I think understanding strategy before we do anything in any business is really important. And it often shocks me how few organizations, even some with really large organizations, when you ask them about strategy, they're not super clear about any of it. And so you've made this kind of deliberate shift from CEO to this behavioral marketing expert. I love that. So talk to me a little bit about why identity is so important in your positioning or company's positioning.
Yeah, I kind of came to the whole field of behavioral economics not too long ago. And frankly, it's only been around for about 20 years. I mean, it was really like 2007 when Kahneman published his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, was kind of the start of that whole thing. But my entire career, and I think what drew me to being in marketing, was really understanding how people make decisions. And why does a particular phrase on a particular ad work and a different phrase not work? And that always fascinated me. And it wasn't until I really got into understanding behavioral economics and behavioral marketing that I began to get the science behind why those things work. And so today, what I do is I bring that to the organizations that I work with to help them understand not only, what might be why their current strategy or their current go into market plan may not be working. And usually there are pretty solid behavioral science explanations for that. And then also talk about strategies that are more likely to work because they're tailored to how we actually think and how we as humans, how we actually think and make decisions and deal with all the cognitive biases that we have. I don't want to turn this into a monologue, but one of the problems that I often see, and I bet you probably do as well, companies talking about with their main marketing message will be things like, hey, here's how we can improve your ROI, or here are the features, the benefits, here's all the great things that we do. And they haven't really thought about how to frame the value that they bring to the market in terms that their reader or their user or their potential customer will actually identify with and adopt.
I love that you just said that. I feel like I've been in an industry for 15 years where I've had to rewrite the narrative. I'm like, we're explaining this to our customers super technical, but the people that are signing off on this are not super technical. So they're trying to understand what we're selling them and how much it's going to cost and what it's doing for them. And we're telling them statistics and tech things and tech lingo that they don't understand. And it's so true to really get clear of why people are even searching your website, phoning you. Why are they buying? What is the buying reason behind of it? And then being consistent with this strategy. I find, maybe you can shed some light on it. I feel like everybody's strategy is this: let's shift. Okay, let's shift again because AI. Oh, wait, we need humans too. Let's shift back to the human. And so what's always really worked for me in anything personally or professionally has been consistency. But I often find right now we're not giving things enough time to churn to really figure out if it's working. And, part of that, I would say it's because of the world we live in, that it's moving so fast and everybody wants, revenue yesterday, not tomorrow. And so it's really hard to kind of balance these two things. So talk to me a little bit about what role consistency makes in a world that is changing so quickly and under a lot of pressure.
Ready to lead smarter and invest wiser? On the Executive Connect podcast, we unpack executive strategies for wealth and influence. Hit the subscribe button now. Don't just watch, act.
That being consistent in many dimensions is really important. One thing, just to kind of close on the last thing that we were talking about, I'll give your listeners a quick way to know whether their messaging is off target. Go to your own website and count the number of times that you say we, our, or your brand name. And then count the number of times you say you or your on your website. If you're saying we, our, or your brand name more than you're saying, you've written your website for yourself, not for your customer, and not in their perspective. So that's a quick trick just to diagnose whether you have an issue or not. And then going to the consistency thing. Look, again, another problem that I see often is because organizations have not done the hard work to develop a sound strategy, they feel like they have to try lots of things. So they spend a little bit in social media, and they spend a little bit on paid search, and they spend a little bit on trade shows, and they spread the limited budget that they have across a wide variety of activities. And the problem with that is they can't generate any kind of consistency in any one of those platforms, right? The potential buyers, yes, they might cross we all do. We use multiple platforms, but for every person, there are a few primary ones. And if you're not really showing up in a consistent way on the same platform in front of the same audience over and over again, you're not going to break through the noise. And the result will be, again, you might get lucky. One of them might luck out and hit, but chances are pretty good you're going to be spending a lot of money across a wide variety of things and not really know which is working because you're not getting enough critical mass in any single one of them to make it work.
Yeah, I love that. It just makes I'm smiling on the inside because I've worked for marketing leaders that are like, oh my gosh, we've been so successful at trade shows. And then our entire strategy pivots to trade shows. And I would argue I don't do a lot of deals, as an elite salesperson at trade shows. I don't close a lot of deals. That's where, we're educating, finding new people. When I'm closing deals, I'm sitting in front of a customer. I'm not doing it at a trade show because they're probably there to see a bunch of other people as well. And so consistency matters, and getting in front of those customers, the same customers, to your point, over and over and over is really key. If you can't be in front of them all the time, you got to use marketing, and whatever your marketing strategy has to be over and over. So they're thinking of you when you have that problem and as an expert. So I love that point. I want to talk about, now you built content platforms while still operating. How do you think about leverage instead of volume?
Yeah. So what I mean by that is it matters more about the quality of the content that you're putting out than the volume of the content that you're putting out. Now, that's not to say that you don't need repetition. You absolutely do. But one of the things that I think a lot of us marketers and organizations lose track of is that not everyone is listening to everything that you say. In fact, they're probably listening to very little of what you say. So by the time you get tired of a marketing message, your customer's probably just starting to hear it, right? So I see organizations change their campaigns or go to market their messaging mainly out of boredom, I think, right? They just get bored with it and they decide, okay, we need to do something else. And the reality is, like, your target buyer is only hearing a very, very small fraction of what you're putting out there. So, that goes back to the question about, leverage versus volume, right? So if you're putting out a limited amount of content, but you can message it in multiple ways, right? You can message it across multiple platforms. You can repost. You can, we're on a podcast now. I'm very sure that you're going to run this entire episode someplace, but you probably will also pull out lots of short reels and videos and promos that you can do around it. You might send an email to your subscriber list, letting them know about the podcast with some background on it, right? You can repurpose that same content in lots of places. So it's far more important that the content be good and be designed in a way that will make it resonate with your target audience than it is to put out a mass volume. And always keep in mind that you can repurpose content that you've produced before in multiple ways.
No, yeah, and I absolutely agree with that. It's funny because I think it's even longer now. I find that people are on content overload or email overload. Everybody's going after, the guys at the top, or this, in my case, the CIOs, CTOs, CEOs. And so they're kind of bombarded with content and emails. And so you really got to be, consistent and clear. To your point, I have to check my website if it says, I'm curious to see how many times. That's going to be a fun trick. But talk to me a little bit about how this content that we're creating is translating into opportunities.
Yeah. So I think it depends on what type of content we're talking about. And it definitely can generate opportunities, but it is a long game. And sometimes it's very hard to tell whether the content marketing, the content that you're putting out is really driving the needle or not. But one quick way to check is, if you're being consistent across all of your go-to-market messaging, the content that you're putting out probably exists in some form within your sales materials or a sales pitch that you might do. So, if you're in the midst, and I encourage, as a CMO, I would often sit in on sales calls. I encourage, anybody in leadership, sit in on some sales calls every now and then, go along to a sales presentation in person if you can. That's even better. And, when your salesperson starts going through their pitch, if you're getting like blank looks from the audience or questions like, hey, can you go back 3 slides and explain what you were talking about, then you immediately know that messaging is missing and it's not resonating, and it's time to go back to the drawing board and recreate it.
Yeah, I agree with you. And that's a great piece of advice, having CMOs sit in and understand, pitches, because they can look at the decks they're using, the content they're using, how they're selling what they're selling. I'm sitting here thinking, Rich, I'm like, have I ever in my career had a marketing person sit in with me? And the answer is no. I don't think I've ever had, as an elite salesperson driving, hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue. I've never had a CMO. I've had many CEOs sit with me. I've had many technical people sit with me, but I don't think I've ever had a marketing person. And so that's a huge, nugget of wisdom to leverage. And so, talk to me a little bit about this content burnout that I'm seeing and hearing a lot of people talk about. How do you avoid this kind of content burnout game?
Yeah. So I think, again, it goes back to quality over quantity, right? If you are feeling burnt out, chances are pretty good that you're doing things that aren't actually adding value. And my advice when I hear that is take a step back, really like analyze how you are spending your time. Where are you putting your time? How much of a particular type of content are you putting out? And be honest, is that like, what are the things that are going to add the most value? So, burnout often comes from doing too many things without feeling like you're getting anywhere, right? You're not making progress. So by limiting and being more focused on the things that are working or are the things that are most likely to be the most valuable, you can eliminate a lot of the other stuff, and you'll find that your ultimate results will improve. Because we also have just a natural tendency as humans to feel like, well, we want to be out there for everybody. When you ask someone who their ideal customer is and they give you a really, really, really wide range, they have a challenge there, because as buyers, as consumers, we're not looking for a generalist. We're looking for specialists. We're looking for people who can solve our exact problem. And it's just like if you needed a knee replacement. Okay, how are you going to find the doctor? Are you going to go to the doctor who does shoulders, elbows, wrists, ankles, and knees? Or are you going to go to the doctor that does 10 knee replacements every single day? Right? Like, you want the specialist. You want the knee replacement specialist. You don't want a generalist. And the same is true with everything that we buy. So, oftentimes, again, burnout is caused by trying to be too many things to too many people, do too many things in too many places. So I find the solution is to refocus on the things that really matter and eliminate all of that other stuff.
Yeah, and I love that you brought that up because it's so relevant, I think, a lot of times. And I know I'm guilty of it as a salesperson. I'm like, this client wants this thing. We could totally do it. We could totally, repurpose these resources to do that. And I've been successful talking, senior leadership into pivoting a strategy many, many times. I would say, more than the latter. But what I realize now on the other side of that, then we become the Cheesecake Factory and people don't really understand, what we're offering. We want to be at the in and out. We understand we're selling cheeseburgers and fries, not every type of food. And so I love that you brought that up because I think it's so true. It's so easy to get sideways in what you're offering and not really focus on who you are and what you're offering. And so I want to talk a little bit about thought leadership versus thought followership. And why does so much of the content right now sound exactly the same and read exactly the same? And how does behavioral science change that?
Yeah, I think a lot reads and sounds the same because, again, we have this tendency to think that, well, if someone else is doing it, it'll work for me too. And companies do this as well. I mean, I don't know about you, but, I get pitched for all kinds of things on LinkedIn every single day. And, it is uncanny how many of the messages that I receive on LinkedIn are identical, like almost identical. And some of it could be because people are using LLMs and AI to produce their messaging. But a lot of it is just because, we have this kind of copycat strategy that exists in a lot of industries. And the problem with that is that, well, if you're saying the same thing that everybody else is saying, then your buyer can't tell the difference between you. One example I always give, I've worked for a lot of financial institutions, a lot of banks. Raise your hand if your bank says that they don't have great rates and great fees, low fees, right? Every single bank says that. They all say it.
True.
So it's worthless, right? Like if you see that advertising, you're like, okay, yeah, they all say that. So I don't really know whether they do or not. Now I have to do the work to shop and find out, right? So you've got to really think about, what are you saying and I always encourage you to try to come up with superlatives like best, first, fastest, only, proprietary, right? Patented, something that you can say that's unique to you, that's a superlative that matters to your target buyer. And that's when you are really getting honed in on effective messaging.
Yeah, and I love that you brought the bank up because all banks right now are increasing their fees. Every bank across the board is increasing fees. And it's funny that you bring up the bank because what they're defaulting to is this quote unquote safe messaging that, this bank did it. And so they're similar size. So we should do that. Or they posted their, high yield, CDs or whatever. And so people are, copycatting kind of essentially. But I do think there is this special, way to differentiate yourself and actually think through things and make ideas memorable to your potential, whatever your avatar is in whatever industry. And so, how does one get there and make things, memorable to their right, ideal client? Money Ripples is on a mission to help professionals just like you get their money working harder for you. Their clients free up an average of $35,000 their very first year without having to work extra hours. To show you how, they've put together a powerful training called Cash Flow Secrets, and the listeners of the Executive Connect podcast can get it completely free. Just visit moneyripples.com/secrets and enter the promo code EXEC.
Yeah, it really starts with beginning to understand your buyer, your target buyer's psychology. I've spent a lot of my career as marketing commodities, right? Like mortgages, over my shoulder right there is a racing helmet that has the Ditech logo on it. I was the CMO of Ditech Mortgage, national mortgage company, top 10 company in the country for a period of time. And, when you're marketing mortgages, well, one, no one really wants one, right? Like, do you really want a mortgage? No, I don't. What you want is what comes along with it, right? So part of understanding the buyer psychology, it was really when I took over there and was kind of relaunching that brand, it really came down to understanding who was in my persuadable target audience, right? Because my potential audience is every homeowner in the United States, right? But I knew that not everybody's going to like us, right? So part of it is figuring out, okay, who is persuadable, who's in that soft middle, so to speak, just like running a political campaign is very similar, and understanding who they are and what is motivating them. So long-winded way of saying, you really have to drill into who is your target buyer, what are the things that are, not what, if you ask them what they want, they'll tell you what they like, want, or need. But what they really are after is solving the pain or the fear that sits below those likes, wants, and needs. It's almost like an iceberg in the ocean, right? The likes, wants, and needs are the part that you see above the surface, but below the surface is all the pain and the fear that person is experiencing. And if you can come up with what you can say about yourself from a messaging perspective that resolves that pain and that fear, that's where you will unlock action, right? Because it's emotion that drives action, and we tend to think that we are rational beings, but as humans, we're actually more like meaning making and feeling machines that think every once in a while. And so we really tend to make decisions based on emotion and then rationalize them later. So even in a B2B environment, it's really important to think about what are the kind of pains and fears that my buyer is experiencing that our product or service resolves. And that's what I want to message to. And honestly, that continues through the entire sales cycle, right? Okay, let's say you get engaged with a B2B customer, potential customer. You get them into your pipeline, sales teams beginning to work with them. You've got a champion inside the organization, but what is that champion really experiencing? Yes, they're interested. They want your product, but there's also a lot of political risk that they take within the organization, right? There's a lot of work that they have to do. They may have to go to their legal department and get it approved. They may have to go to IT and get it approved. They may have to go through the compliance department to get it approved. They may have to put a presentation together for senior management to get the budget approved. It's a lot of political risk. And so a lot of, success in the B2B world is de-risking the buying process for your buyer, right? Trying to make it as easy for them as possible and reduce the perceived risk that they have from saying yes to buying from you.
Yeah, and the emotion is so key. And I really believe storytelling plays a really important role in what your company is, why did you start it, what do you offer, like to your point earlier about what do you do for potential customers, but telling that journey, telling that story, because you're right, you're spot on. People buy on emotion. And you want to kind of, not be phony with it. I think a lot of times people can tell, when we're not being phony, but they can also say, hey, I started this business because, like I have friends who started businesses because their spouse died and they wanted to help other spouses solve a problem, through their journey. And they told this story about, losing a spouse and what they had to go through. And their business just took off, right? Because they were very authentic. They were very genuine on why they started it. And the emotion was there and you could feel it and you could tell it. And they solved a problem that I would say people don't start to think about until they're older. And so I love the emotion. And I think it goes back, to trust. Trust is an asset. And I think a lot of times, I know you've worked with leaders across decades. Talk to me about how this trust that you've built early in your career to where you are today has compounded over time.
Yeah, I think trust is built through consistency and transparency, quite honest, and clarity, right? I'll talk first give you a corporate example and then talk personally. So I was the chief marketing officer of AIG Bank during the financial crisis in 2008. So I was at the ground zero, sort of the center of that whole mess. The bank where I worked was not the source of AIG's problems. It was a different business unit, but we were tarred with the same brush. And, overnight, we saw our brand awareness, which was for a $1 trillion market cap company, was really, really small, go to everybody in the world knew who we were. Brand awareness was 100%, but the perception of our brand was, in the tank. And the way we got out of that was being very public about what our path to recovery was, what the milestones would be, how we were going to pay back the government, and when that would happen, and then hitting those milestones. So it's, I know it sounds cliche, but say what you're going to do and do what you say, right? Like those are the things that build trust. Consistency over time, transparency, delivering on what you promise to do in a quality way. That's what builds trust. It builds trust for a corporation. In the AIG example, it's the same for for you personally in your career and how you build trust. It's be transparent, say what you're going to do what you're going to say, try to be very clear. Another place that I think is a mistake that creates mistrust is having a lack of alignment within your team or with your leadership. And so making sure that you're really clear on, okay, here's what we're going to do. Is that right? Right. Make sure that everybody's aligned. And that's something that has to be maintained over time. It doesn't just happen magically. How many organizations have you worked for where you spend 4 months, from August through the end of the year, creating your plan and your budget for the next year, and you get the budget approved by finance on December 29th, when everybody's on vacation. And in February, if you were to ask most of the people what was in that plan, they would have no idea. Right? It's completely gone by that point. And the problem there is they're not actually staying aligned. You have to put energy into maintaining that alignment back to your, objectives or whatever your goals are throughout the whole team. Or, there's just natural drift that occurs. And pretty soon, people are kind of doing their own thing or defaulting back to the way it used to be before the new strategy, you name it. But you're wasting a lot of energy. And that actually creates distrust, because then you don't feel like, well, I think I'm doing this, but they're doing something else. I don't trust them anymore. Right.
This episode is sponsored by Texas Freedom Fund. If you're an accredited investor looking to protect your purchasing power, reduce taxes, and own real Texas energy assets, listen up. The Texas Freedom Fund invests in proven oil and gas projects in the Eagle Ford Shale with no debt and strong tax advantages like intangible drilling costs applied against active income. Minimum investment is $25,000 and the sponsor invests right alongside every single deal. Learn more at texasfreedomfund.executiveconnectpodcast.com. Energy, opportunity, and Texas grit working for your portfolio. I love that, because I think trust is lost quickly when you don't do what you say you're going to do. And I'll tell you, I've been part of organizations that either cut budgets or were going to do something and they didn't, or they were sponsoring and they decided not to. And I'll tell you, because there's your company brand and then there's your brand. And often, we're attached to the companies we work for, but then there's your own independent brand. And I've been part of, direction changes, budget changes. We're not sponsoring this. Yet I gave my word to a client. And there's been time to keep trust in my relationships. I've paid for things out of my own pocket because the company wasn't going to keep their commitment. I decided personally I was wanting to keep my commitment. And it's funny how, and by accident, one time a client found out about this because they noticed the credit card I was paying with was my personal credit card. And it had been previously a corporate credit card with the corporation's name on it. And they came and they approached me and they're like, "Are you paying for this out of your own money?" And I was hesitant what to do at that point, right? Because I didn't, want to, make the company lose trust, right? That I worked for with that customer. But I wanted to keep my trust and my authenticity. And so I told the client, and to this day, I am very close with that customer. I am close friends with that customer. I am their confidant. And because I made the decision, I wasn't going to lose trust because the company I work for did it was just a number, it was just dollars to them. And that, trust scales, right? And because of that choice that I made, that same customer has been a referral for me for many different things, not even in my day job, but they have helped me, do things in my personal life. When I had my son, they mailed me gifts to my son. I mean, trust is a really important thing. And so, kind of piggybacking off my story a little bit, the reason the company pivoted is they were reinventing themselves, they were changing direction. And so, let's talk a little bit about, for the companies, that are in this pivot stage and they're reinventing what they do and how they do it. Let's talk about how they do that without burning the house down or losing the trust that they've built with clients and companies. So for executives building something beyond just their role, what's the safest way to do that?
Yeah. So again, I think it's really about transparency and being, honest and authentic with people. And I think that's exactly what you did in the example that you gave, which was a great one. You definitely did the right thing, and all of us who've gotten to kind of C-suite or senior roles have all been put in those situations where you had made a commitment to somebody external, whether you were going to hire a person or buy from a particular vendor or increase your contract or continue your contract or continue a sponsorship. We've all been in those situations where either you get an edict down that says, hey, we're changing direction and you got to go a different way, or there's just the realities of the business change. And what we were doing, what we thought was working is not working, so we need to make a change. And those are uncomfortable conversations, but I think if you go to whoever the counterparty is and you're just honest, like, hey, here's the situation, here's where we are, put your cards on the table and be straight with them. And usually they might be disappointed, but they'll appreciate your honesty and they'll appreciate you being upfront, and also be timely, right? Bad news doesn't get better with age. So as soon as you know it, be timely. Because if you can give, if the termination clause in your contract says you get 30 days and you're 90 days out and you're going to terminate, don't wait, right? Tell them. Just say, hey, we're not likely to renew. I'm not giving you official notice yet because we don't give you the official notice until X date, but hey, I'm just telling you we're not going to renew. So that speaks. Again, they'll be disappointed that you're bringing bad news, but the fact that you're being straight and honest and timely and even proactive, that counts for a lot. And that, I think, is probably really one of the key ways to maintain trust through those situations, and frankly, improve your personal brand as well too. Because yes, people associate you with your organization, but people still buy from people, and that relationship is really important because they may move to another company, you may move to another company, and as you said, every little piece of trust that you build with a person compounds exponentially over time, just like compound interest.
Yeah, and it's funny. I've had more executive leaders call me and say, hey, I'm trying to decide between this company and that company. And it's not a company that I worked for. And it's not something that I, know super well. They're like, hey, do you know anybody over there? Or what do you think? And they're asking for my opinion because they see me as, somebody who, understands an industry, understands a space, knows a lot of people in this space, and, values my opinion. And I think if you can get in any business you're in, if you could get to a place where your customers are calling you about things that you don't even offer, they look at you as, a friend, as a trusted advisor. And that is the place to be when you're selling things, because it's not really, sales. I often joke, I'm actually a civil engineer, and I found my way into sales not because I identify as a salesperson. I found my way into sales is because I solve, hard problems for people that they can't find solutions for. And I became a salesperson because of that. And I've sold more things that I don't even sell for a living to clients than I ever sold for companies I've worked for, just because of, you know, how I solve problems. But I want to talk a little bit. I know a lot of people right now are in a place where they're building a side hustle, or they're, in this 90-day period where, there's going to be a lot of layoffs, and they're trying to figure out, how do I build something while I'm still employed or serving out my time? What is your recommendation on how to build when still employed?
Yeah, I would say, a lot of people give advice that says you should do what you love. And I don't really think that that's true or helpful. I think really you should follow your talent first, not your passion. So think about it, like, what are you, and, ask people, you work with, ask your current boss, ask the people who report to you, your peers, ask your friends, the people who know you well. Just say, like, hey, when you think of me, what is it that I do that is unique that other people don't do? And I think that's a really important exercise, is to get out of your own head and ask others, because frankly, their perception of you is what your brand is in the, in the world, right? So you often will gain some great insights. Just like, yeah, okay, I am good at that, but I didn't really think that was important. And someone will tell you, it's like, no, that thing, that capability that you have, that's really unique. I don't see that very much, and you wouldn't necessarily know that yourself. And so, like, ask those questions, find that thing, those things that you do that others don't do, and that's where you start, right?
Oh, I
That's where
love
you
that.
get your.
And follow the money, right? If your joy is, at X, a thing, but you're not making any money at it, it's probably not the place you should, work on your side hustle. Or maybe you could do a little bit of it on the side, but I also say follow the money. And so when is the right time for people to fully transition?
Yeah, I wish I had a really good answer and I could pinpoint the point in time on that. I would say, though, it's probably earlier than most people think. The reality in life is that few decisions that you make are final or fatal. Most everything can be unwound, and you can go back from. So, and you can probably also survive on a lot less than you think you can survive on if you really tried, right? So I think that like fear of uncertainty, and that fear of oh well, I'm making this monumentous decision and this is going to change the rest of my life, and I'm going to have to go down this path, and that's not true, right? You can pivot, you can make a change. So I think people wait too long, quite honestly, in many cases. Now, that's not to say that, you got to at least get to the point where you've got something. As you said, is it something that's generating any money? If you get a little bit coming in, what you got to have some case that says, okay, yeah, I think I've got something here. You have to actually at least get it out in the market and try it for a little bit before you really can make that jump. But again, like, don't wait too long.
Yeah, I agree with you. I love to end on that because it's so true. And you remind us that clarity, trust, and authority are what really turns ideas into actual results. So, for founders and executives that are scaling companies, this isn't optional, it's the foundation. If you've enjoyed this episode of the Executive Connect podcast, share it with leaders that are building authority or scaling their company. For more information and content on strategy, growth, and leadership, subscribe to YouTube or follow us on your favorite platform. Thank you so much for being here today, Rich, and sharing your knowledge with our listeners.
Thanks so much for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation.